Hi everyone, so today I'm reviewing Celeste Ng's Little Fires Everywhere. This is her second book. I never read her first one, but I am interested in it. It's just that this one I was not super impressed by. It doesn't suck, I said that on my Goodreads review. It's not the absolute worst it could be, but I definitely don't think it's worth the hype that it got, and I really expected much more from it. Much more depth, really, I would say, from the, not so much from the reviews, but just from the plot itself. What I was told, what it was about. I mean, I thought it would be just much more interesting and give much more than it really did, basically. So I'm going to go point by point. The way I do reviews is I have 5 points, and there's for each star, and each point can be either no star, half star, or a full star. Writing style is my first point, and for this I do give a half star. Basically, this writing style is very simple. It's easy to understand what's going on in the novel, but it also has some flaws that just make it seem not very carefully written, put together. Some of the sentences, most of the sentences are just so long and have so many commas going on, especially at the beginning. There's even so much use of dashes because it's like she wants to fit as much information in the sentences in just one sentence as possible. The writing style makes it so that basically the narrator is just explaining, telling you things, as opposed to showing things and making you know things by just figuring things out yourself. Something that, I mean, I'll elaborate on that further on the next point, which is the plot or storyline. One of the weakest points, I think, for this novel is that, first of all, it gets pretty boring. With the first chapter, you see something exciting going on, because it is about a house that gets burned down, and you can tell from the first chapter that it was deliberate. So it gets interesting, but the chapters that follow that one are so boring. They're so bland. I mean, even the dialogue, even though it's realistic, I definitely have to give her that. The dialogue is pretty good, but people are so transparent with their dialogue very often, and it just doesn't make it very interesting to read until the whole baby subplot thing with the McClure. I know this is slow paced, but it's often really bland in the descriptions that it gives. Like, she did this and that and the other, she XYZ, she put these things carefully on the ceiling, and she saw the photographs form different things and this and that and the other. Things that are honestly just not that interesting, and they don't really convince me that the character is interesting. Another thing is that sometimes you'd have this story going on, and then in between there'd be some slight, short backstories, like flashbacks to something that the character had done or gone through before, to explain kind of why they behave a certain way, and I thought it was just kind of lazy, to be honest. Kind of lazily put there. I get the point of doing that, but it was like placed there, not kind of forcefully placed there, not and the thing is, at the point, by the time I read all these long backstories for characters, I hadn't yet learned why I should even care about these characters in the first place, because some of them weren't really, some were more three-dimensional than others. That's the next point. But also, let me tell you something about the ending. I will not give away the ending, but I'm just going to say it's really rushed, it's kind of forced. Some things are just not realistic, but just straight up unbelievable and kind of cheesy, honestly. The photos thing on the envelopes, I thought that was incredibly corny. I mean, it gives the reader the satisfaction, but I found it so absurd, and I just was not very satisfied with the ending itself because of that. And also with the adopted baby subplot thing, I also did think that I also thought the ending for that subplot was really forced and just so difficult for me to believe. There were several things that were so just kind of predictable. There's a love triangle, by the way, in this novel, and it goes exactly the way you would expect it to go. Everything basically goes exactly the way you'd expect it with that love triangle, and some things were just way too convenient, awfully convenient, way too much of a coincidence, and just too easy for certain characters to do certain things to make the plot move forward and stuff like that. Like I said, dialogue is very strong, but people are kind of direct and transparent in regards to their intentions very often, especially with the beginning. And in the whole beginning, kind of like the first third of this book, there's basically no conflict going on. It's so boring. I thought it was anyway. Like, it's telling you like these parallels between the rich family, you know, the Richardsons, which are, you know, the rather middle upper class family, and then the rather poor family of Mia Warren. And I get why it's doing that, but I don't think it works for me. It doesn't really evoke much. It does not make it so interesting to me, especially because I don't think the characters themselves are that interesting and that very well fleshed out. So for plot and storyline, I decided to just give it no star because of the huge flaws that I found in it. For characters, again, no star at all. Again, possibly the weakest point of this book entirely, even though it seems to be a character based, I think they call it a character-driven novel or something like that. As easy as she was to hate, Mrs. Richardson was probably the most realistic character. I mean, she was quite the archetype. And at some point she was basically the same person as Linda McCulloch, but at least she was flawed. At least we could see her flaws where they were glaring. Characters like Mia and Pearl they were just such Mary Sue's. I mean, it was so bad. I was mad at Mia for a while because the bad things that she did were almost immediately forgiven by the author themselves. It was bad, but no, I guess she already paid for her sins or whatever. I mean, no. No, if you have read it and you know what bad thing I'm talking about, that was just terrible, and that was never really discussed much for the fact that it was basically the main thing that made her backstory and Pearl's life in general. Basically everyone who was on the side of Pearl or Mia were the good ones, and they were portrayed as the good ones, and if you were rather on the side of the Richardsons, you were bad. I just don't think the author was being fair to the characters, to be honest with you. It's as if Mia was the person that the author was putting themselves into, or I guess herself into, and her lines were almost as if the author were putting her words, her thoughts directly into that particular character's mouths, and everyone would just be fascinated by her and would go, oh, everything that she says is so wise and interesting, and I'm so fascinated by everything she ever does, and I need to be around her all the time. Yeah, Mia did some bad things, but they were completely justified because her life has been so difficult. No, I mean, I don't like that. Every character that at some point did something bad to Mia, or something that Mia would have disagreed with, or something that Mia was against, they were eventually punished in some way by the story. It just seemed like the author and the narrator in a way were just blatantly biased, and I didn't like, again, I don't like to be told whose side to be on. I just want to be shown that, and if it seems too forced, if it seems like you're clearly just trying to make one seem like the good one, and it kind of bothers me because there's this pretension of empathy and like, oh, both people have their motivations and everything, but you're clearly biased towards one of these sides. So Izzy was probably the character that I liked the most because she was flawed. I mean, she wasn't very flawed, but at least she wasn't taken very seriously, and at least she got in trouble with authorities and stuff like that. And you know, even her family kind of made fun of her and stuff like that. Again, even she was kind of an archetype, but she was very likable, I think. And since she was so young, she was also pretty impulsive and immature, which I think made her so much more realistic. So again, favorite character, not by much. I did care about her near the ending of the story. I was kind of rooting for her, especially. Her and basically every character was super in love with Mia, and I just couldn't get past that just blatant Mary Sue-ness. And that's an aspect that immediately will make a book bad for me, when a character is just too perfect or too close to perfect or has a few minor flaws that are really flaws. I mean, like Pearl also. They were so victimized by the author, honestly. For Depth, it has half a star. I definitely saw that Celeste was trying to do something, and I got kind of what she was trying to do, but she was actually trying to do so many things, like so many topics. And you know, this is not an incredibly short book, but for the amount of things that were mentioned, not really discussed, just mentioned in the book, it's really not enough to elaborate on all of them. And it's almost like, you know, nothing was really proposed that much, and if it was just kind of simple. It does make us see some backstory with opposing, with characters with opposing interests, but it still lacks a lot of nuance, I think, because of that, being biased towards certain characters and some of them being more perfect and good people. So for a lot of it, I just felt like things were interpreted, also because of the writing style, but in just all of the factors that went into the book, I felt made it so that everything was almost already interpreted for you. Even when describing characters and situations, the narrator would go directly on the mind of someone and explain their motivations to you. Like, oh, Mrs. Richardson thought that it was great to do XYZ. In that sense, it just kind of feeds information to you instead of making you see and make out things yourself by gestures or by the dialogue itself and stuff like that. It's a little too direct, I think, in that sense. I definitely think that the topics discussed in this book, or I guess mentioned, put in this book, are definitely relevant to discuss, and we can still get some discussion from a book like this. But I don't think that the book itself, honestly, just has that much depth. The last point is my personal feelings towards the story, whether I enjoyed it or not. Half a star for this one again. I most likely would not reread this book. Firstly, because a third of it, the first third of it is honestly just boring to me. And because I feel the ending is just it doesn't ruin everything because there's flaws all the way through, but I don't think it makes anything worth it. It does not really fix anything for me, the ending. However, I was still attached to some of the characters, like I said, Izzy, and I still feel bad for Pearl when she had to, when the ending and stuff like that. And there was a line that actually made me laugh, which was the line that goes, "The docent giving the class a tour was elderly and thin and looked as if all the juice had been sucked out of him through a straw via his pursed mouth." I don't really recommend this book that much. I can see why someone would be intrigued by it, but I can definitely see how someone would be disappointed by this book. I was kind of disappointed by the book. I really wanted to like it. I don't really hate on books for the sake of it, so this is just my honest opinion on the book. Again, I still enjoyed some parts of it. I think there's a lot of things here that are worthwhile, but I just don't think it was very carefully put together, and maybe her, I don't know. I'm still interested in her next novels and what things she'll write afterward, and also I'm interested in reading her first novel because a lot of people who didn't like this novel did like her first one. So let me know what you guys think about this novel or her first one, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!